From the city of brotherly love, this is Shark Bite Biz with David Strausser.
You just arrived to the season 6 debut of Shark Bite Biz. I'm your rockstar wannabe host, David Strausser. This is your place to learn how to grow a business during complete global chaos. Today's episode is brought to you by Seidor, S-E-I-D-O-R. Check us out for your technical back-end business management solutions. Today, it's all about deep listening, though, as I have been, hinting out there, I do have a huge announcement. Oftentimes I preach, or even our guests, they talk about career transformation, taking risk, and me personally, I took my own advice. I just did that. As all of you know, I was the regional general manager for Vision 33 in the Northeast, and they are one of the top ERP implementation organizations out there globally. Was with them for 7 years, very, very secure position, very good people. But I just took a leap of faith and took a national role as the VP of Business Development with a new company starting today. And they are the sponsor of this episode as well. It's basically, I had a chance, and many of you out there should be able to relate, because you oftentimes, just as I went through, you get a chance like this, but you're nervous, you're scared, you have the what if factors, and you got to do risk reward, but more importantly, you have to believe in yourself. My suggestion: take a jump off the deep end and really trust in your own skills, your abilities to be able to deliver. And that's why I ended up taking the move and could not be happier to be part of a global SAP implementation leaders team in the role of VP of Business Development for Seidor. So wish me luck as I help transform their American business. I've got a huge task ahead of me. I'm nervous, but I'm also, really excited as well, too. So that concludes today's special announcement. And let's get back to today's show, okay? We're going to chat on deep listening. Last season, we had an episode that was on your brain and how it connects with writing. Now we're going to look at the other end of that and talk about listening skills. So who do we have today? None other than Oscar Trimboli. Oscar Trimboli is on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners. He is an author, host of the Apple award-winning podcast Deep Listening, and a sought-after keynote speaker. He is passionate about using the gift of listening to bring positive change in homes, workplaces, and cultures worldwide. He had interviewed over 100 of the most diverse workplace listeners, including air traffic controllers, deaf and foreign language interpreters, hostage negotiators, and spies, as part of researching world-class listening. Over 14,000 people have contributed to his research about what gets in their way when it comes to listening. Oscar is a marketing and technology industry veteran working for Microsoft, PeopleSoft, Polycom, and Vodafone. He also consults to American Express, AstraZeneca, Google, HSBC, Montblanc, PwC, Salesforce, Sanofi, and Simons. So, hey, without further delay, let's bring Oscar right on in here.
Business strategy.
Oscar, welcome to Shark Bite Biz. You, my friend, you just became Shark Bait.
Thank you, David. Looking forward to listening to your questions today.
I'm looking forward to speaking with you today because you consult with American Express. I said that during my intro, and man, I got a bone to pick with Amex, so I'm gonna have you do a personal concierge call for me with them as well too. But anyways, the very first thing we always ask, each one of our guests, what's your background? What's your experience? What do you do for a living? How'd you get there? Tell us your journey, basically in a nutshell, Oscar. What makes Oscar? Oscar.
I think to understand me, you got to zoom into April 20 08. And in 2008, in April, I was in a boardroom in Sydney with 18 other people on a video conference between Sydney, Singapore, and Seattle. It was our annual budget setting process. And budgets are really important because get them right, people get to keep their jobs, make good bonuses, you get to grow. Get them wrong, people lose their jobs. It drives down morale. This meeting was scheduled to go for 90 minutes. And at the 20-minute mark, my vice president looked me straight in the eye and said, Oscar, we need to talk immediately after this meeting. Now, I don't know about you, David, but when somebody says that to you, all I was thinking is how many weeks of salary have I got left in my bank account?
I get that feeling every time HR sends me an unscheduled message in Microsoft Teams. I'm thinking, okay, what did I do? Who did I talk to? What did I do? Who did I talk to? So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, surprisingly, this meeting that was famous for going anywhere up to 3 hours, the annual budget setting meeting, it finished at the 70-minute mark. It finished actually early. And Tracy asked me to close the door when everybody left. And as I walked back, she said to me, you have no idea what you did at the 20-minute mark, do you? And I thought, great, I'm getting fired and I got no idea what I did to get fired. And as I sat down next to her, she said, if you could code the way you listen, you could change the world. And as profound as that was from Tracy, the only thing going through my head, David, was, woohoo, I hadn't been fired. And I've been trying to honor Tracy's request since 2008 to code how I listen. So we've coded it into a listening quiz. We've coded it into 3 books. We've coded it into playing cards. We've coded it into a jigsaw puzzle game. We've coded it into an Apple Award-winning podcast. So we're doing everything in our power to code it. And along with a deep listening ambassador community, a group of like-minded workplace listening professionals, we're on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners in the world because we think that will change the way workplaces have conversations. So that's me in a nutshell.
It's pretty nutty, I'd say. No, just kidding. But deep listeners, what is a deep listener? I'd love to hear. Okay, so I know that you get into the neuroscience of listening, and this is to me very fascinating that the interview's coming now because just a few weeks ago, one of our counterparts in the UK, he actually was studying all about the neuroscience of writing and how that works with the brain and stuff like that. And I found that incredibly intriguing about how I don't know, just how everything develops, how it works. Really interesting. So here we have the opposite end of it, where his was writing output. You're listening as far as input into the brain. So define to me, what is the deep listening?
Well, good listeners listen to what people say, and deep listeners listen to what people don't say. They notice what's absent in the conversation rather than what's present. And good listeners listen during the conversation. Deep listeners listen before, during, and after the conversation. Good listeners listen for similarities. They listen for the familiar. Deep listeners listen for differences and the unusual. When it comes to deep listening, if you know the 3 numbers, if you know these 3 numbers, you're ahead of 98% of workplace listening professionals. These 3 numbers, 125, 400, and 900, if you know these numbers, you understand why it's more important to listen to what's not said rather than it is to listen to what is said. And honestly, who cares about listening? The impact of listening to what's not said reduces sales cycles, keeps great staff in your organization, shortens meetings, increases profitability, and ultimately puts you ahead of your competition. So those 3 numbers, 125, 400, 900.
I did memorize those numbers just in case you were quizzing me.
I won't quiz you. 125 is the average workplace speaking speed per minute, okay? 125 words per minute is your speaking speed on average. If you're a real estate agent, a cattle yard auctioneer, a horse race caller, you're speaking at about 200 words per minute. So right now, if you're listening to me on a podcast app or on YouTube, you're probably listening at 1.5 speed, 2 times speed, because you can still have complete comprehension at a faster speed. That's because you can listen at 400 words per minute and have complete comprehension.
I usually go 1.8.
1.8? Awesome. And of these three numbers, the most important is 900. 900 is the average thinking speed. Now, this is very important when it comes to the speaker. If a speaker can think at 900 words per minute, yet they can only speak at 125 words per minute, it means the first thing they say is 14% of what they mean. And if you're in a briefing call, you're in a sales call, you're in a project meeting with a client, another employee, if all you do is listen to the first thing they say and start having a conversation about that, you're having a conversation with 14% of what they think. And as a result, you're going to have a lot of confusion, chaos, conflict, frustration, rework, or even worse, you may win a client, but you've heard the wrong thing. And as a result, when you get into implementation, they say, no, that's not what I explained. And all of a sudden you've got yourself an unprofitable project. I'm sure that's never happened to you, David.
That's happened a lot in our industry. And, we were talking before we started recording, Oscar has similarity in the ERP space like I do. And there's plenty of times where I'll be at a call with one of my sales reps and, we hear the customer say X, Y, and Z, and my sales rep be like, oh, great. So he's going to talk to the DPS to get a quote, our pro services team. And they'll be like, yeah, we need a quote on A, B, and C. And I'm like, no. Customer said they just need X, Y, and Z. No. They need A, B, and C. It's like, no, trust me, just do it. Because I like to think I'm a little bit more intuitive in the listening. Now, sometimes if I'm just brought in to the game late, I could be a little wrong. Okay. But if I'm there from the beginning, I usually get it right because I'm listening to what not only when you get into tech sales, it's hard because there's really two categories. There's sophisticated and unsophisticated customers. And unsophisticated doesn't mean they're dumb or anything like that. It just means this is the first time that they've gone through a buying process of something like this so complex, and they may not be able to express the right words for the pain points that they're feeling. And that's where I'm experienced enough to where I can kind of get the cues of what they mean. Does that make sense?
It does. And although that relies on you and your sellers to be rock stars, I mentioned earlier on that listening happens before, during, and after a conversation. One of the things you can do to assist the unsophisticated buyer, somebody who hasn't gone through the procurement process, is provide them with checklists, provide them with a white paper, the top 10 things you need to consider when selecting a system. When you send that to them in advance, they can start to think about things in a way they won't in that instant when you're talking to them in that moment. And if you can educate your buyer before you get in the room, you're going to be able to differentiate yourself from anybody else who's selling against you in that sense. So one of the things I would encourage you to do, don't leave it to chance. Give them some material a week in advance of the meeting, not a day or an hour before, just so they can reflect on that. Quite often, one of the big questions for unsophisticated buyers is you don't understand the backstory. You don't understand the buying landscape. You don't understand the process of procurement. I think good sellers beat the competition and great sellers help the customer get a business case over the line. I think they're very different selling approaches. One is helping the customer succeed through implementation, and the other one is just beating the competition. I think most of us would like to be the second kind of seller because that increases loyalty, referral, and cost of sale is reduced as well. When you listen carefully for what they will tell you, a lot of people, we talk about this in the 5 levels of listening in our book, is at level 3, we should always be asking the question, take me back to when you first noticed the issue in this case. You know, the issue may be we've got too many manual processes, we have billing errors, we have very unhappy customers when we have billing errors. That might be an example. In that example, we want to basically go, who else is impacted by that inside your organization? What processes are impacted by that? And what you do is you help that person realize that to get this business case over the line, there are many people who have to come along on the journey. And your role is to help them listen for the political landscape in the organization they're working with as well, not just the story they tell you the first time, David. Have you ever had a situation where you beat the competition, but you didn't beat the business case?
Beat the competition, but didn't beat the business case. I would probably say there's got to be some point that has happened in my career.
We were working with a CRM vendor about, it was about 2012. They'd done a great job. They were working with a client and they beat the competition. And it was towards the end of the fiscal year. They were going through the process, got to finance, project got stopped. Why? Because Kimberly Clark, the people who provided toilet paper to the organization, said to the finance professional, if you buy a full year worth of toilet paper, we'll deliver it as you use it, but we'll give you a 50% discount. And that organization who was selling CRM software beat the competition, but lost to toilet paper.
Wow. That's crazy. You know, I've always heard of crazy stories like that. And I have had some crazy things, not to that degree, but I've had some similar situations. None that, unfortunately, trying to rack my brain right now, none that come to me on the spot. But I did want to ask you something that you mentioned earlier. You said about, you know, listening isn't just during the call or during the presentation, but it's from before and after as well. In the days of COVID, the days of remote work, the days that you're not in the office building, you know, it's a little bit hard to get feedback or verbal or visual feedback, you know, before, during, and after virtual presentations anymore. I mean, how can people really adapt to that to make sure that they're listening, you know, the best that they can?
Well, one of the questions you don't want to ask people for at the end of a presentation is, can you give me some feedback on how we went?
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing I personally would never, even when I'm doing a sales deal, I've never asked it. I don't know. I usually would put in something, and I'm just winging this, but I'm kind of like, so, you know, you guys just saw the presentation, hearing your questions, seeing what I saw on the camera. It looks like we're check marking your boxes. So I want to ask you, what other unanswered questions do you all have? And that's kind of what I would do at the end of a presentation as a transition to try to figure out what other pain, because there's no way that we addressed everything on the first shot, you know, but what other pain points linger? What comes to mind, and let's start setting up the next step of the sales process. Is that a good approach? What do you think?
Yeah, you could do that. Yet in that moment, the likelihood you've got to ask that question at least if it's a 1 hour meeting, you've got to ask that question at the 45-minute mark, not at the 55-minute mark. Okay. That's an important thing to do. The other thing to build on that, what we know working with our clients in selling situations is this, and this is the question we pose to them. Ask the people in the room how they would explain it to somebody who's not in the room. So you would simply say, hey, how would you explain this, what you've heard in the last hour, in one sentence to the business owner? And they go, oh, okay. And it feels like a fairly neutral, safe question, right? And they go, you've got a really expensive system that'll probably do the job for us, right? That's how they would explain it to their owner. As opposed to you saying to them, hey, have you got any more questions? What you want to do is understand what they heard and how they would explain it to somebody else.
Well, it wasn't more, do you have any more questions? It's more to the degree of the pain points. Have we addressed the pain points? You got to put the full context there. Have we addressed all your pain points What else is out there lingering? What else can we answer for you?
Yeah, but they'll only answer the pain points from their perspective, David. They won't answer it from the business owner's perspective. We want to get out of the room is my point. If you really want to listen to what's not said, get out of the room. It doesn't matter if it's virtual. Get them mentally out of the room and go, there's a business owner over there. That business owner, what are you going to explain to them from what we've discussed? Now, the flip of that, and this is a really high yield question, given the business owner couldn't be here today, what's the one question you think they would ask us that we haven't covered off?
That's amazing. Yeah.
Right. So we're pushing. It's fascinating for the people in the room, but they're not the buyers in the context we're talking about. We need them to expose a little bit more so we can help them be successful. A lot of people will answer questions that you ask them always from their perspective. Push them up, get them at level 3, get them out of their context and start to drive the business case rather than the technical outcome, did we do this? Did we do that? Are we missing anything functionally? Which you'll typically get answered in those very first couple of conversations, David.
For the most part, okay, again, we'll just go back to tech because everybody that's an avid viewer of my show knows what ERP is by now. And roughly, whether I'm selling Microsoft, SAP, or selling Oracle NetSuite, they all pretty much do the same thing. The difference is maybe SAP does this a little better, and maybe NetSuite does that a little better. Maybe Microsoft, I don't know, does what Microsoft does better. But they all more or less do the same thing, just in their own way. Very few things really differentiate the product, but the few things that do differentiate the product could be, what actually gets your deal sold because it happens to be a pain point for that client.
Yeah. And again, make sure you're asking that question broadly, whether that's before the meeting through your checklist of questions or your white paper. And then after the meeting or towards the end of the meeting, make sure they explain to you what they've heard, because a lot of times as they're trying to process it, remember the speed at which they can process it is 900 words per minute. Now, in collaborative, creative, resource-constrained environments, which probably are the ones you're operating in, they could be thinking up to 1,600 words per minute. The average is 900. The likelihood that what they say the first time at the end of that meeting and is exactly what they mean, 14%. If you're in an environment where they're 1,600 words per minute, 5%. The likelihood they can express what they want to express at the end of your meeting, pretty low, as opposed to ask those questions well after the meeting, a day later, 2 days later. But signal at the end of the meeting that you are going to ask those questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fine. And that's honestly usually what happens. No, David, I think you addressed all our pain points and we're pretty happy with what we saw. We'll let you know if anybody comes up with any questions. And 2 days later, I have a list of 15 questions to answer. But it's all good. It's part of the process. We're used to that by now. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and again, I wanted to ask it because when I saw the N word being neuroscience, to be clear, when I saw that N word in your stuff, it really triggered me with the neuroscience because I had a whole episode on the neuroscience of writing, like I said earlier. I want to learn a little bit. We can go high level. I don't want to go super deep, but you've explained it to some degrees, but like what part of the brain, for example, is active for listening? Where does that get received at?
So just behind the skull here is the prefrontal cortex. And this is where we use working memory to process our conversational listening, just behind the skull. Now, working memory is finite. A lot of people say, hey, Oscar, I can multitask and listen. Yes, this is true. If you're doing routine tasks like gardening, maybe chopping vegetables, maybe driving an automobile. If you're doing routine tasks, you can listen to music as an example. Sure, no problem. But when I interviewed 2 neuroscientists who have written books on attention, specifically on the topic of listening, they said if you're in a conversation with another human, that requires some level of unpredictability, and we've just talked about it with the presentation you talked about. You need to be completely present. You can't be using working memory. Working memory is like a browser tab. You keep opening tabs up, eventually it'll slow down and won't be as effective. So before you get into a conversation, one of the things Professor Stefan van der Sterkel from Utrecht University has written a couple of books on attention. Do you know how many times I had to practice that to ultimately get it right? Now, with Stefan, he said something fascinating. He said, if you're talking to a human, Oscar, when it comes to listening, because you're using working memory, you can task switch on working memory, but you won't do either function effectively. So he said, when it comes to listening, my advice is simply that: listen. Be present in the moment.
You know, one of my mentors has always told me that, don't know if you're religious or not, but I don't think it's really religious per se. I just religious because it uses the name God. But she said that her mother always taught her that God made us with 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we're supposed to use them proportionately. And that was always her key, and her mother teaching her that you should listen, 2/3 of the time and be speaking 1/3 of the time.
Yeah. And there are Bible passages on be slow to speak and quick to listen as well.
Is there really? I did not know that. So maybe there was a religious tie-in. I just wasn't aware, but she was telling me, she comes from apparently like a non-secular house. So that's why I was kind of surprised that that ties in. But give me your opinion on that.
The proportions are roughly right. They're slightly out. When you just went through the neuroscience there, you got 1:9 as a ratio, 1:4 as a ratio. I would say if you want to listen well, 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. If you want to listen better, if you want to have shorter sales cycles, more happy customers, more employees that stay with you, you'll probably increase that ratio to 3 times or 4 times. Because one of the things we know from our research with 22,000 listeners that we've researched and 1,410 that we track, we've been tracking them for 4 years now. The number one thing they say they get back in their day is time. Their meetings are shorter, and the meetings that they do have are higher quality. So one question it's funny you mentioned the demonstration scenario. I was working with a client about 4 months ago, and they went through this whole demo and everything like that. And at the 50-minute mark in the meeting, they said, "Is there anything else?" And they said, "Well, actually, you covered everything off in the first 10 minutes, but they just kept talking." So one of the things I would recommend if you want to shorten your meetings and yet make it useful for the client is ask this question. If you want to make a meeting shorter for an employee and useful for them, ask this question. If you want to make a meeting shorter for an employer, ask this question. At the beginning of every conversation, just ask. Ideally, do it before you meet, but in the moment. This has got nothing to do with the agenda or the outcome of the meeting. What would make this a great conversation?
Yeah, I've heard that. A few times. And I've never tried it, but I've only heard it in passing. I've never heard it from like an expert like you telling me like, hey, do this will make a difference. And now that I have, I'm going to try it before this episode actually airs.
So before you do, it's a 1-2 punch. You don't ask that question standalone. When you ask that question, they'll say to you, "David, this will make it a great conversation for me." Now, David, one of the things we know from our research, 28% of people ask the opposite question back to the host. So most people are really selfish. They'll never ask you what's going to be a good conversation for you. How do you shorten the meeting? Using that as a listening compass through the rest of the conversation. Imagine it's a 1-hour meeting. I don't recommend 1-hour meetings, by the way. I recommend 50-minute meetings or 20-minute meetings. I'll talk about that shortly as well. If it's a 1 hour meeting, at the 15-minute mark, at the 30-minute mark, and at the 45-minute mark, ask this question. David, when we started today, you said this will make it a good conversation, and you repeat what they said. How are we going? They go, oh, wow, he remembered and he's listening. Now, what happens, our clients say to us, is two things will happen. Thanks, David. We're at the 15-minute mark in the meeting. Thanks, David. I've literally covered off everything I want to cover off today. Thanks. That's all I need. Awesome. 1 hour meeting just became a 15-minute meeting. Or they go at the 15-minute mark, thanks, David. Covered off everything. Thank you very much. One thing we haven't covered off, though, and it's really important to me, blah, 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 blah. Got nothing to do with the agenda, got nothing to do with the outcome, but because you took the time to check, your trust level just went up, and they're going to give you a bigger problem to start to think about as well, which translates to higher value commercially and a bigger opportunity.
Yeah, no, that definitely sounds great. However, my question for you, and I'm asking this again, because a lot of people that watch this show, they may be thinking exactly what I'm thinking. Like, hey, what you said sounds good. If we're doing our normal check-in type calls, like, okay, yeah, we can just do a 15, 20-minute call, which, like, for example, my initial call, I'm always like, hey, can we just jump on for a quick 20-minute call for me to go through some things real quick and make sure we're a match? And it usually, works out pretty good. But when you're going through a demonstration of the software, I mean, that's something that, typically you're talking an hour on the low end to 4 or 5 hours on a high end. And it could be multiple days, like 3 6-hour days worth of demos with different groups of people. So are you saying, would that be like the exception to the rule?
No, you still ask the question. You work within the constraints of the context you're in. But what it gives them is permission to tell you something that's not in the structure of the demo. So they might say to you, look, it's really important that we go through this demo today, but I want to let you know we've just been notified that our organization will be acquired. You still going to do the demo, or are you going to change the way you do the demo?
Yeah, it would definitely change. It would not necessarily kill the deal, but it may change a deal depending on what the terms of the buyout is. We've had that happen a few times. There was one of our customers that, for example, very, very famous customer, known worldwide, but they did bankruptcy in the US. The sales rep actually did not want to engage with them. I'm not calling them. They just did bankruptcy, and it's like, no, they just did bankruptcy. Okay. Now they got a clear slate. Call them, we'll be the first person they owe money to. But it was actually for their Central, South American, Asian parts of the business, which are extremely, it was extremely profitable for them pre-COVID. I don't know how it is during COVID right now, but pre-COVID, it was extremely profitable and they were not in bankruptcy in those areas. And we ended up getting the deal. It was one of the largest ones that we got for the small business SAP Business One platform. It was an amazing sale, but again, sales rep not even wanting to try just because they filed for bankruptcy. That drives me bonkers. He should have got zero commission on that.
My point is really simple. Don't leave it to chance. Have a process. Ask that question at the beginning of the meeting. Have the discipline to do it. Now, back to 50-minute meetings, by the way, David. Start a meeting at either 5 after the hour or 10 after the hour. Here's why. Most people are in back-to-back meetings. And when I do this with my clients, they say to me, oh, I really love our meetings, Oscar, because I get some time to go to the bathroom. I have some time to get some lunch. I have some time to collect my thoughts and become present to the dialogue. When I start a conversation with them at 5 after the hour, they're ready to go. They're not distracted. They're not trying to process the last meeting. They are present. They can listen to themselves. And more importantly, they can do the work they need to going forward. So please, one of the things I would encourage you all to do is start your meeting 5 after the hour. Now, be careful. You've got to tell the client that that's not a mistake, because a lot of people will think you made a mistake. Just send them an email and just say, I'm definitely going to be there at 5 after the hour. Now, for the very first time that ever happens with my clients, I always log in at the top of the hour because they are so regimented that they dial in at the top of the hour anyway, even though the meeting's at 5 after the hour. So I say to them, look, we've scheduled this meeting for 5 after the hour. Go and make yourself a cup of coffee. Go and make yourself a glass of water. I just want them to do something to disconnect their brain from the last meeting. Then they can listen to themselves and they can listen to me.
So I have one last final question for you, Oscar, and this has been amazing so far. So many great tidbits that I'm going to try out and, share with my sales team too, to help try to make them better. But out of all the customers, all the meetings you've had in your life, give me one example of where listening has probably made the biggest difference for you, except for the one that you mentioned earlier with the budget. You can't include that one. I need one more story, one more good story. What I'm picking up on, you're a good storyteller, and I like hearing your stories.
2015, I was brought in to work with a pharmaceutical company that had some huge quality issues. They did sterile manufacturing. And for 3 months, they had consistently inconsistent impurities in their production line. Now, when batches are held up, they actually have to get destroyed. They're about $1 million a batch. And as a result, I was brought in by the plant CEO, and he said, Oscar, I'm going to put you in a room of 93 people leaders in this organization. We're really struggling with this quality issue. Get them to listen to each other. That was the brief, right? Get the 93 people managers to listen to each other. So I came into the room, and it was a really narrow room. Normally a room's wide and short at the back. This was the opposite. It was a bit weird. But as I walked in, you could feel tension because they'd had another production stop, another $1 million. And when they added it all up, it was over $10 million in this issue. Now, I had a whole day workshop with them, starting at 10 and finishing at 4. And I started the workshop very simply. I said, turn to the person next to you, have a chat, and answer this question: who are we not listening to right now? Who are we not listening to? So they have a chat, and for 10 minutes, the room energy changed and a lot of vibrancy. So I bring them back and I say, okay, tell me what you've heard. We're not listening to production. We're not listening to frontline workers. We're not listening to frontline workers. I said, great. It was 10:30, David. I sent them out. I said, come back at 1 o'clock, go and talk to the production workers. Don't stop the production line, but go and talk to the production workers. 1 o'clock, they came back in. And somebody told me a story that changed my life. There was a 62-year-old Maori, huge man who had been working for that company for 36 years. And he had lodged a ticket on their production control system best part of a year ago, saying that this one pipe, and the pipe was $3, was rusty. But his manager told him, we haven't got time to fix a $3 pipe because we've got production volumes that we have to get to. They didn't listen to this production line worker. They ignored him. It ended up costing them $10 million. They went and changed that one pipe. And in the room was PhDs in chemistry and masters, and I got none of that. But because I asked them who they're not listening to and go and listen to those people, they're very able to quickly diagnose something for 3 months with all their intergalactic Six Sigma methodology that they couldn't resolve. And yet just by going and talking to frontline workers, they solved it within a day and saved them.
One rusty pipe.
One rusty pipe.
Wow. That is pretty amazing. And I think that's a pretty compelling story. And that's why I asked you for another one, because I got to tell you, Oscar, out of all the people I've had on this show, you are probably the best, one of the best, if not the best storyteller I believe I've had on this show, of being able to tell these real life stories in a way that people can visualize it, to be able to learn and process the information that you're sharing. You got a special skill, my friend. Like, it is amazing.
Yeah, the irony is in 2019, I thought to get to 100 million deep listeners in the world, I just needed to listen really well. And then a very good friend of mine, Dermot, with a beautiful Irish accent, said, "You idiot, you're going to have to learn how to speak. You're going to have to learn to tell the stories that you tell, Oscar, because you listen to the stories so well. Rather than staying in touch with me, I would rather you learn about your own listening villain, your own listening barrier, and join the 22,000 other people who've taken the listening quiz, listeningquiz.com. You'll get a report that tells you your primary listening barrier. And if you want to stay in touch with me, that'll give you some little pointers to how you can stay in touch with me. But I'd rather you learn about your listening than spend time talking to me.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So we have listeningquiz.com, and why don't we get your podcast and everything else out there about Oscar Trimboli?
Look, David, I want to give everyone a really simple one thing to do. If you do listeningquiz.com, in the report you'll get the links to the podcast, you'll get the link to the books and the quiz and everything else from there. So just listeningquiz.com and go and take the 7-minute quiz and find your primary listening barrier.
And that's a wrap, everybody. Listeningquiz.com. It's got the gateway to Oscar and his listening success. Oscar, thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing. I've learned a lot from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Cheers. Wow, that was an incredible chat with Oscar, right? Wasn't it? I loved it. First, you all know the routine. If you found this interview helpful, if it sparked some warm and fuzzies, do me a favor. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. But if you really want to help us out because you know Shark Bite Biz is the greatest kept secret in the world of small business, please share us out to your friends, your colleagues, your family, wherever you dwell on the interwebs. I don't care if it's Twitter, if it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Minds, wherever, Rumble. Get the word out there about Shark Bite Biz so that you can hear week in and week out experts like we have today with Oscar Trimboli. Now let's get back to the real rock star of the show, Mr. Oscar Trimboli. The topics we discuss are all critical for business success, okay? Many people just talk, and we all know those people that just talk. I'm guilty of that sometimes with myself, but they also have the bad habit of hearing what they want to hear. They didn't hear what was said. They hear what they wanted to hear. So if you're in sales, we call that happy ears. You think you're getting a sale, but honestly, you've got 50 other steps in there and you're not even realizing it because you're skipping from A to Z. You're listening on the surface, but you aren't doing the deep listening to what your clients, bosses, people like that are really trying to tell you, okay? The neuroscience behind listening, I find fascinating. Like I said earlier, it's similar to what we learned about the science behind writing. It comes down to one of the only ways to truly grow is by listening, okay? Listen for feedback on areas you can grow on. Listen to feedback on how to sell more deals, delivering to the customer what the customer is really saying, what they are really wanting. You need to listen, and that's what I love what Oscar's doing with his deep listening program. Awesome stuff, Oscar. I know you are an extremely busy man. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing about the mission that you're doing and trying to get 100 million deep listeners. Please check out his website, oscartrimboli.com. And as always, we'll have the link right down below in the description. Question of the day. How well do you listen? Leave a comment below on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, Rumble, or wherever you can. Leave a comment, even if it's on our Facebook page. Love to hear what you think about listening, what you think about Oscar and his advice. Do you want to be on the show? We are now scheduling for season 6 interviews at sharkbitebiz.com. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, join the channel. $3 a month, you can become a baby shark. Download the app on Google Play Store, Shark Bite Biz, real easy. Or just give us a super thanks, the little heart with a $, $1, $10, $5, whatever you can do. Every dollar helps us to complete the mission that we're out here doing. You all know this by now, but I'll tell you once again. I'm David Strausser. This is Shark Bite Biz, and we'll see you all next episode. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Shark Bite Biz. We hope you got some insightful info from this podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us through your favorite podcast app and visit us on the web at www.sharkbitebiz.com. How has business changed for you in the 20s? Email us at podcast@sharkbitebiz.com so you can join us and share your story.